What is up? Welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Life Podcast. I am Marcus Grant, joined by Dwain McFarland, and here we go, diving headlong into Week 8. So, Dwain, here we are. We're the back half now of the fantasy regular season, and I know we're always still trying to learn new things, but I feel like we're in a good spot to kind of take a lot of the data points we've gathered, a lot of the lessons we've learned, and now put them into action for the stretch run. So are we ready? Are we ready for these final 7 weeks or so of the fantasy regular season?
Yeah, man, we are always ready. I think we're kind of at that point now where we're taking more like, yeah, 7 weeks is great, but now we're also kind of trying to get a feel for trends, right? We've got 2 3-week sets of data, like if we want to look at that, or 1-3 and 1-4, 1-4 and 1-3, whatever way you want to say it. Because we do know that things also change. Like that's in this industry, like as soon as you're comfortable and you think that you know everything that's going on, like there's surely going to be something that there's always a curveball. And we know that defenses like to adapt. Typically, teams are watching the last 3 to 4 weeks of film. So some guys that may have been hot, over the first month may have cooled off a little bit. And that's because whenever, the coordinators go in the room and, it's so funny when we watch these shows that, they don't know the players' names. They just know their numbers. They're like, hey, who's number 88 on the Cowboys? Like, we probably want to cover him. They're throwing him the ball all the time. And so, but those things can swing back the other way as well, right? Because suddenly if there's somebody else popping up that they're noticing is getting a lot of attention in an offense, then that may cause the next coordinator to be like, okay, we're going to change the game plan. We're going to go this other way. So, yeah, there's a lot. And that's just one example, defense, right? We've got injuries. There's so many things we have to adapt and account for. And, we got it all ready. We got a lot of cool ranking stuff today.
Yeah, that's not even taking into account, we've had a couple of trades already with some running backs moving spots. You got some defensive additions there in Philadelphia, them getting Robert Quinn, and there could be some more trades to come in the next few days before the NFL trade deadline hits. So that's going to force us to tweak things again. And
did you see the video yesterday with Roquan? Did you see the video yesterday with Roquan?
Yeah.
That's that was I hate it for him, but it was really cool, I think, for people to see. I know when you get to thinking about fantasy, right, and players like from a fantasy aspect, a lot of times I think we do forget, and I'm guilty of this at times, these are people. And so it's pretty cool, like when you see something like that and you realize, like, just like we go to work every day and you may have someone that you love working with, and if they leave, like that's you don't like, you're happy for them, but at the same time, like that can be really hard. And so obviously he's really close with Quinn, and so heart emoji out to Roquan Smith, who is playing like a madman. Like he is playing amazing this season.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny you say that. I played fantasy with some guys, notably a few former NFL players who have said they don't like making trades because they feel like they're sad to have to send players off their team. And I was like, they in real life, they have no idea that you've traded them from your fantasy roster, but they kind of.
And does that all tie back to their experiences in the league of seeing people get traded and the way people get treated? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it really does. I mean, so it's like it is on the surface, it's kind of a funny thing, but you realize that deep down there's actually a real human emotion behind that. So it's sort of interesting.
And for all the superstardom, I know we're kind of on a tangent to start here, but like as I've gotten older, I really pretty much just side with the players. Like when I hear these disputes and things, because I hate to say, at the end of the day, I think I've been doing better about it, not saying it.
You've been really good about that. You have.
But this one isn't. At the end of the day, they get treated like a freaking piece of meat, man.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when the prime is done, when it's over, like they are discarded. Like, it's a cruel business. Mm-hmm. It can be fun while the limelight's shining. It can be really great if you're a quarterback, right? And you can play for a long time. But there are so many guys that are in and out of the league in 3 years. And then there's superstars that really only have a 6-7 year career, depending on the position that you're playing. And so I really do side with the players. Like when they hold out and do these things, I just kind of set aside, like, really, what am I rooting for? I'm only rooting for like laundry. I mean, I think I'm going to just go ahead and like root for the human, like moving forward. Not that everyone is a great person. There are certain things that when I see it, I'm like, ooh, shouldn't have done that. That's a bad move for a player. But I get it. They make their money, and that's what people always say, right? They're like, oh, they get paid. What are they crying for? But there's more to life than just the money, I mean, and we know this, like we're living our lives. Like, we make decisions every day based on, do we want to make money? Do we want to have a better lifestyle? What are the things we want? Players, when they're in that situation, yes, they are making money, but some of them don't even like playing football. And that doesn't mean you have to feel sad for them, but just like you may not like your job, but they're really good at it and they can't make that much money anywhere else. So there's just a lot going on.
No, 100%. It is a limited window for these guys to try and maximize their wealth as much as possible with a thing that they are talented at doing. I mean, when you said that, the name that popped in my head was Todd Gurley, a guy who was at the top
Yeah.
of his game for a number of years, and it fell apart quickly. And then he just recently, in the last couple of weeks, I believe, officially announced his retirement. And it was just he's kind of been for me the example of how quickly things can turn in professional sports, but especially in the National Football League as well. We got a lot to talk about today. We are going to do some rankings, some guys who've been upgraded and downgraded at their respective positions. Also, we're going to take a look at some of the best and worst draft picks by round that we have seen through the first 7+ weeks of the season. Scott Barrett, who does a lot of great work, he went and compiled that list. So we'll kind of break it down and talk about the guys that are overperforming, maybe underperforming, and what we can expect the rest of the year. But let's start in Dallas with their running back situation because Ezekiel Elliott is dealing with a knee issue. Now, mind you, it's the same knee that he hurt last year, but it's a different injury than what he suffered last year. But right now, signs are pointing to him missing this week's game against the Chicago Bears. On paper, it is a great matchup. The Bears defensively have been very good against the pass, not so much against the run. So Tony Pollard now looking like he's going to get the lion's share of the opportunity in that backfield. For you, where do you have him ranked this week?
Yeah, I've got Tony Pollard as my RB4 overall this week. And you mentioned it, like things are just really aligning. This is one of those scenarios where, we hate the injury for Zeke, but from a Pollard perspective, like it really couldn't have lined up any better for him, like on which game that this occurred. So when you look at the Bears, to your point, like the biggest thing is 31.6 rushing attempts per game against them in non-overtime play. Now, a lot of that has to do with their offense because they trail a lot, but they also allow the third most yards, 150, and touchdowns, 1.4 per game in non-overtime play. So those are all really high marks. The other thing is we've seen Pollard play really well for multiple years now, and that's really been the same thing this year. He's got a 90.1 PFF rush grade. That's number 3 in the league for players with at least 50 rushing attempts in 2022. The Cowboys have the 5th best team total on the slate, and they're the 3rd most favored team. So those things just all stack up. You got a Cowboys team that's also been running the ball over expectation versus the league average in close and leading game scripts. So when they've led, they run the ball 6 percentage points more than the NFL average in 2022. So the Cowboys, now some of that ties back to Cooper Rush not having Dak, but we even saw last week with Dak, like if they can keep the game manageable, I think that's kind of what their identity is, at least for now. Maybe that will open up more as we go, but I would expect that to be the plan against the Bears. I don't think they're going to want to throw the ball a lot. I think they want to establish a lead, and then they're going to want to run it. So we've got the efficiency factor working for Pollard. We've got, the utilization is going to be there. He's going to get everything. And then we've also got the matchup and the game environment. All those things stack up. Like he could easily be the RB1 overall this week. I mean, obviously having him RB4, people should know like how confident I am in him. I have him ahead of guys that have been smashing, like Kenneth Walker. I just think that Pollard, he's going to have an opportunity to be involved in the passing game, all of it. So yeah, in love with Tony Pollard this weekend.
I feel like this game and Tony Pollard in particular is going to be a litmus test for fantasy Twitter because you want to talk about a guy who is sort of polarizing in the sense of I think everybody understands that he has played well, but I feel like the argument against him has been, well, can he be as efficient if he's getting a bigger workload? That part of the reason he's been so productive is because the Cowboys have been effective at picking and choosing their spots with him. I don't know the answer to this, and I think this is the week we're going to sort of get a glimpse in it. And maybe it's not a completely fair evaluation because it's just one game as opposed to a long stretch of games. But I really want to watch and see, if Tony Pollard gets 20, 25 touches. I don't know, maybe that seems extreme, but can he be as efficient? I don't know if you have any insight into that, but I feel like that's going to be a lot of the conversation this week. If he goes out and he crushes with 25 touches, there are going to be a lot of people that are going to be saying we were right. Zeke needs to take a seat on the bench. If he goes out and he gets those touches and he's just kind of mid or less, there are going to be a lot of crowing the other way, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think he's an explosive playmaker, so I would expect that to continue, but certainly, the larger the workload you take on, like typically you're going to see some efficiency decrease. But the bigger thing for Pollard that I've noticed this year is the Cowboys aren't just using him in some of the same situations they used to. They've really been mixing him in, like in all of the downs and distance situations, not just putting him out there in situations where it might be a light box or something like that, to where that could help aid, the yardage that Tony Pollard is getting. So I would expect him to be good. I would expect, and look, here's the thing: volume is still the number one driver for running back, and so anytime a player is going to be in line for 20 to 25 touches, which is what Pollard's headed for, like it's going to be hard for him. He's automatically in the top 12 conversation, right away. And if he is just as half as efficient as he's been already, like he's going to be a top 6 back this weekend. But I agree, it will be interesting. I do think there are things. I hate this for Zeke, because Zeke really had his best 2 games, and 2 weeks ago against Philly, that is the best that Zeke has looked probably in 2 years. And so now to pick up another knee injury, I don't know. This could be something that ends up being a bigger storyline than just this weekend. If that lingers and that hurts his productivity, if that hurts his efficiency, this could lead to more work for Pollard, over the course of the season period.
Yeah, I think that's also a big storyline here, as you mentioned, because part of what has made Zeke so awesome in his career, I mean, obviously aside from the skill level, but has been his durability and his dependability. Like, you knew week in and week out Zeke was going to be on the field. I think there were a couple games in years past where they just rested him as the final week of the season. They had nothing to play for, so he just didn't play. But in terms of being injured, he's really either avoided major injury or has found a way to play through it. And you always hear the phrase, sometimes your best ability is your availability. He has always been available for the Cowboys. Hopefully this is not the start of a negative trend, but it's definitely going to be something I think.
It sounded like he wanted to try to play this weekend, to be honest. But I think the team's just looking ahead and like, we've got a week 9 bye. Mm-hmm. And so rest Zeke week 8, you get the bye week in week 9. Week 10, you're back to having 2 healthy backs. I think that's seems to be, the approach the Cowboys are taking. When they asked Zeke about it, he said, "Hey, it's a long week. I still got time." So, he is one of these guys that likes to play.
And I think, side note too, I think some of this has to do with, I think we can take this back a little bit to Cooper Rush, keeping them in the thick of the race in the NFC East. If they had lost several of those games and they were trying to play catch up with the Eagles and the Giants, I wonder if maybe there's more urgency to get Zeke back on the field. But here they are at 5-2. They're still very much within striking distance of not only the division title, but certainly a playoff spot. Maybe that makes it easier to kind of hand the reins over to Tony Pollard for a week and let Zeke get healthy. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. Let's dive into the rankings, which you can, of course, check out at fantasylife.com. It's sortable over there. You can see how a lot of different people are thinking about some of the players this week. But let's start at quarterback with Joe Burrow. And I'm old enough to remember the start of the season when Joe Burrow and the Bengals got off to a slow start, and there were think pieces about what's wrong with the Bengals and is this a Super Bowl hangover and blah, blah, blah. And then, last week, Joe Burrow goes out and throws for a cool 350 yards in the first half, goes for like 450 overall in the ball game. So I guess everything's okay now, right? Like the Bengals are back to being fun and throwing the ball downfield, and we're cool now with Joe Burrow, right?
Yeah, I mean, and maybe a lot of this just chalks up to, we've got to remember when these players don't get much time in training camp, and he didn't with the gallbladder issue. This is 2 years in a row that we've had the gallbladder issue strike. It was CEH the year before, this last year, this year it was Joe Burrow. I identify, like, I've had my gallbladder taken out. Like, it knocked me out for like a week, I lost some weight too. Like, maybe I need to lose, if there was another gallbladder, maybe I would lose that and, shortcut the workout regimen here. But yeah, as far as the Bengals, like the big thing I'm noticing, Marcus, is the fact that, they're really leaning into the passing game. That had been something that we saw in Joe Burrow's rookie season. We didn't see so much in his second season, probably, protecting him, from the really bad, knee injury that he had as a rookie. Now, towards the end of the year, they did start to pass more. And then ultimately, we all know the Bengals went to the Super Bowl. But this year, it started off not bad. Like, they were still, throwing the ball more than the NFL average. But now over the last several weeks, they've really ramped that up. So if you look at games where they're within 3 points, so close game scripts, excluding overtime, They're throwing the ball 74% of the time. That's 15 percentage points above the league average this season. If you look at when they're leading by 4 or more points, the average NFL team is throwing the ball 51% of the time in those scenarios. The Bengals are throwing it 59%. So they're plus 8 percentage points. So they're right at the league average whenever they're trailing, which is weird. Oh, we're trailing. We're going to slow down. We're going to run the ball. I don't know. Some of that stuff can come down to the sample size and down and distance and kind of stuff where they were trailing on those plays. But overall, what we're seeing is they know their identity is in the passing game. Which makes sense. Like, come on, like Zach Taylor, like you look out there and you see T. Higgins, you see, Jamar Chase, you see Tyler Boyd, even Hayden Hurst playing well this year. Like, it just makes more sense. To go to the passing game. And so it does look like Burrow's healthy. You mentioned it. But I mean, he's got 3 top 5 finishes, in the last 3 games. He's averaging 30 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So Burrow, I moved up my rest of the season rankings, and this week I've got him as my QB3.
Yeah, so we can all, everybody who's panicked, you can all calm down here. It was also nice to be reminded that Tyler Boyd is still a good football player. We spend a lot of time talking about Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, but Tyler Boyd, dude, can still play football. So it was good to see him have a nice blow-up game last week.
It takes 2 pretty good additions, like just to make Tyler Boyd, something that no one wants to talk about anymore.
Right, exactly.
I mean, that's how good T. Higgins and Jamar Chase are. But yeah, I agree. It is nice to see Tyler Boyd get a little bit for himself as well.
Absolutely. There are 2 teams on a bye this week, but they are 2 notable teams. The Chiefs and the Chargers both have the week off, which means you don't have Patrick Mahomes or Justin Herbert available to you this week. So look at some streaming options here. We're going back to the Jimmy Garoppolo well, huh? Maybe I'm sighing because as a 49er fan, I watch him and he makes me sad sometimes. I know all the conditions are right for him to be a streaming option. I just have to take off my Jimmy Garoppolo glasses of disappointment and sort of put those aside for the week. So please make me feel better about Jimmy Garoppolo against the Rams.
I have to take those same glasses off. Jimmy is definitely one of those players that you just want to look at the numbers. You don't want to watch. You don't. When you watch, you're like, oh man, falling backwards again. No pressure in his face. Oh man, looks like he's like wincing, like 2 minutes, before the snap even goes off. It's like there are some challenges there with Jimmy G, but he can be a point guard, he can be a distributor, and the main thing that I'm looking for in players like this, looking for really, is there a trend going on, with them, which there is with Jimmy G. He's averaging 284 yards and 2 touchdowns per game. Some of you would kill literally for that output with some of the quarterbacks you're having to start. So maybe it didn't just a streaming week for Jimmy G. Some people may be listening to this going, I think I'm just going to pick Jimmy G up, period. I would start him over Aaron Rodgers. I would start him over Russell Wilson. I would start him over all these guys. But the other components I'm looking for is like, the weapons, right, around them. That's the next thing. And he's obviously got that. We've got Christian McCaffrey now in the backfield. You got Debo. You got Brandon Ayuk. You got George Kittle. You could argue there's not a, if you looked across the 2 running backs, tight end, and the running back, the tight end, and the 2 receivers, you could argue that there's not a better group of 4 in the NFL, right? It's definitely in the top 3 or so. Now Debo does have a little bit of a hamstring issue, so we'll have to monitor that with him this week, for the matchup with the Rams. But the other thing is just the 49ers. They've been forced to have to throw the ball more the last couple weeks. That's the thing we don't know, Marcus. That is the wild card. Will Kyle Shanahan, now that he's got all these weapons, is he going to stick with a game plan that is more like 2022-ish, or are we going to, and it's not been bad. This has worked for Kyle Shanahan, or is he going to go back to his dad's bread and butter, the Mike Shanahan offense? Because that's what he runs, and it's a run heavy offense. It makes sense in some ways. I know it's what makes his offense go, but in other ways it's kind of maddening, right? When you look at all the talent you have, you're kind of like, I get it, and your system has worked, but you could probably run the same exact system and just throw the ball like 65% of the time and still use your play action and all those other things you use. And guess what? The defense still has to react, and it could be really good. So that's the wild card. Is he going to go back into did he get Christian McCaffrey because he wants to pound in between the tackles and run the wide zone stuff and run the ball 50% of the time? If he did that, then Jimmy G's not going to be very helpful to you. It's going to mean that Debo Samuel and Ayuk and Kittle, they're all just going to become less valuable with CMC on the roster, because when they do pass, that's more people you got to spread it out between, and they don't throw the ball a lot. So I'm really interested in seeing that. Like, that's a major storyline, rest of the season storyline, is with all the weapons that they have. Will the 49ers just open it up a tad? They don't got to be the most pass heavy team in the league. We just need them to be above average. So I don't know. You may have a pulse on this thing. Being someone that follows the 49ers closer than me, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think right now it's kind of a mystery right now. We just don't know. And getting CMC there last week, I don't know that it completely counts, right? He got in there late in the week. He got 10 touches. He was fine. There's nothing wrong with what I saw out of Christian McCaffrey, but I think we just don't have any idea of what Kyle Shanahan cooks up. So I think this is the week that I think we get a better glimpse at it. And I think after this week, we'll have more of an idea sort of what to expect with this offense. So I think we're all equally in the dark about what this could mean for everybody, which is why I really want to watch this game and see what happens. So
what's your hunch? What's your hunch?
My hunch is actually, it doesn't change a lot. It's just you've taken him. You have a more talented player back there. You have a guy that you can certainly count on to catch the football more, which is not something they were doing with Jeff Wilson. He's fine. He's not Christian McCaffrey, but I don't think in terms of what they want to do, in terms of when they run, how much they run, I don't know that changes a whole lot. You just now have somebody that can kind of scoop up some more targets. I do hope
my fear. That's my fear.
I do hope that now that you have a more talented running back, maybe this means George Kittle runs a few more routes, that he's less of a blocking option, but we'll see about that. But
and Kittle actually, Kittle's route participation has been elite this season. So like, he's a really good blocker in the run game, but when they're throwing the ball, like, he's one of the top 3 tight ends in routes run per dropback. The issue has just been that they don't, to your point, throw the ball enough. They wanna just keep handing the ball off. So that's all Kittle needs. Kittle just needs the offense just to open up a little bit. And I think you're probably right. My concern is that it's going to take games where the 49ers are forced to throw the ball more. And I think they like knowing they've got the additional weapons and they can hang with anyone. But I don't know. Like, sometimes I'm like, if that's not the identity of your offense, and you just kind of got to go into that gear, like, when you need it. Like, sometimes it makes me wonder, like, if you just ran a more, pass heavy offense, a little bit more often, like, then Jimmy G's just that much more prepared for whenever you need to do it. But he's been good the last 3 weeks. That's, so we can't take that away.
Yeah, people who love the law and sausage and Jimmy Garoppolo fantasy points should watch neither one being made. That's sort of my fall on that. Real quick, Jared Goff, Justin Fields. Fields had a great game last week against the Patriots. Goff, not so much really against the Cowboys. Is there one you like better than the other for streaming purposes this week?
I still slightly lean to Goff right now, but I like Fields as the pickup because I think he's more of a long-term. You could keep him on your roster as a QB2, right? We talked about him already earlier in this week, so I won't belabor all those points, but what it all boils down to is 10.3 rushing attempts per game, so, and it does look like the underlying stuff is telling us that that's going to remain because he scrambles a lot and they're integrating him into the design rushing attempts. So in a quarterback wasteland, if you will, in 2022, the thing I like about the matchup is not as good. It's the Cowboys. The Cowboys are probably going to sack Justin Fields, I don't know, 6-7 times.
Right.
I don't know how many of those he's going to fumble. Like, Micah Parsons going to sack him personally 3 or 4 times. So the Bears' offensive line is not that. The Bears want to run the ball. That's their identity. But that's what we want for a quarterback like Justin Fields. If they can keep the game close, Fields, his legs are going to save any fantasy box score. He may not throw a passing touchdown this weekend, but he could still come through with 80 to 100 yards on the ground. And if he punches one of those in, you're in business. That's all you need. So I don't necessarily love this weekend's matchup. But what I like about it is if it goes okay, and if you're willing to hold him on your roster, even if you've got someone else because you could trade him, I really do think Justin Fields is going to have value moving forward just because the quarterback situation is so bad. And we just know these guys that run like this, Marcus, like, it's hard to keep them out of the top 12. And with all of your league mates hurting, he ends up turning into something that you can flip for another piece that you need for your team if you've already got another quarterback that you really like. So I like him because of that. If I just had to pick in a vacuum for this week, I would go with Goff. Goff is kind of like Jimmy G. He's a facilitator, But, if you're a point guard and there's no one to pass the ball to, like, it's not good. And that's really been the scenario that he's been put in for the last few games. But it does sound like Amon-Ra is completely clear. He's going to be playing. He did not actually have a concussion last week, but because of the symptoms he showed on the field, the independent neurologist deemed that he couldn't return to the game. So, and that's a good thing, for the players. It's tough for fantasy players. You hear that and you're like, oh my God, like Amon-Ra could have been back out there. I lost him like after one drive. Oh man, that sucks. But I understand totally what they're trying to do for the players, but it does sound like he will be out there. And if Amon-Ra is out there, well, that's good for Jared Goff.
Absolutely. We'll probably get to him a little bit later too, as well. Let's look at running backs. Joe Mixon. Well, first let's start with Derrick Henry, just because look, I don't think there's a lot to say about him because we know he's good. The matchup is amazing. I've seen the stat floating around that in his last 3 games against the Houston Texans, he's been over 200 rushing yards with multiple
That's
touchdowns.
insane.
It's right. It's
so
just
insane.
Crazy.
What's funny is when you go look at it, none of them were last year. The 2 matchups they had with the Texans, he was already hurt. He was out for the season because he played the first 8 games or 7 games last year. And so he didn't get to play in those. I'm sure he was sitting on his couch in those games in particular being like, damn, wish I was out there. Right? So, we're a little bit removed from those things. Derrick Henry, not quite the player he was at that. He was at his absolute peak at that time, but still really good, a lot better than what people thought he was going to be this year. In fact, the first couple of weeks, it was kind of like, okay, panic mode. We said, everybody wanted to fade Derrick Henry, and they were probably right. Now you're looking at it going, just kidding. You shouldn't have faded Derrick Henry. Like, if you look at him, over the last 4 games, 25.3, 24.1, 27.2, 16.8 fantasy points. That 16.8 is particularly important to me, because that was protected by the fact that they are using him more in the passing game. That, and historically, that line could have very easily turned into a 10-point game. Like what we saw earlier in the year, we had an 8 and an 8.5. But if you look over the last 4 games, Marcus, 16 targets, that's the most that he's had in any 4-game stretch in his career. Dontrell Hilliard is still the passing down back. But the fact that they're trying to get Derrick Henry touches on early downs in the passing game, it's helping insulate, that floor, whenever he has one of these games where you get Tennessee really trailing. The one thing that scares me a little bit is if we do have to go to Malik Willis, this weekend. I know Ryan Tannehill hasn't been great, but he knows how to keep the offense, on track. I worry with Malik, you're going to get Malik, man. It's going to be fun, but I think you're definitely going to have some Zach Wilson moments where you're looking up, you're like, whoa, 2nd and 21, what happened? Like it's a play action, the defensive end's about to grab him. He's just athletic enough to escape that, then escape another, and you look up and you're like, wow, you just ran 11 yards backwards, and now one guy did finally catch you, So I hope they can keep the offense on schedule, but man, you mentioned it, like, the matchup is great. Texans give up 30.5 attempts per game. So it's and the Titans are the 5th most run heavy team in the league. So you just put those 2 things together, that's peanut butter and jelly, man. You got a good sandwich.
Absolutely. Yeah, this one, sometimes this job is easy, and this is one of those moments where this job is really, really easy. Raheem Mostert is sort of making things easy down in Miami, and I was of the mind that, coming into the season, Mostert would be a nice sort of complementary piece, but that this would be Chase Edmonds' backfield. That's completely gone the other way, where this is Raheem Mostert's backfield for real. And he actually had 5 targets last week, which to me, if he's going to start getting targets, then Chase Edmonds just needs to buy a seat cushion so he can get comfortable on the bench. This, again, talking about a good matchup. I mean, we've been picking on the Lions defense all year long. Mostert's getting a lot of the opportunity. This is another one that just feels like a really easy call this week.
Yeah, Mostert, he's just really taken over. Like, listen to these snap shares over the last 4 games: 72%, 69%, 61%, 71%. Anytime you hear the mid 60s, high 70s, that's pretty much in today's NFL. We have a few people that get to 80%. That's an every down back. And that's what Mostert is now. Look at his rushing attempts. He's handled 68%, 69%, 74%, 67%. So he is the primary rushing back. You mentioned the fact that he is getting targeted more, but the even bigger thing is his route participation, and that enables those opportunities to pick up targets. That was the biggest difference last week. He was in a route on 71% of the plays, and the weeks before, they had still been kind of reserving some of those snaps for Chase Edmonds. They just said, you know what, Chase, what you said. Take a seat cushion, dude. Like, you're not bringing any value right now to the team. Chase Edmonds has looked terrible. Absolutely terrible. Like, if you go look at next gen stats, his rushing yards over expected, the percentage of times he actually generates more yards than he should, he's dead last in the NFL. He's dropped touchdown passes. He is just, you couldn't have had a worse year. Like, he had the right profile. We like these explosive playmakers. We like guys that can catch passes, but sometimes you just run cold, and Chase Edmonds has not played well at all this season. Mostert hasn't played great. He's been right around the league average in most of his, the underlying efficiency metrics that we like to look at. But guess what? When Chase Edmonds is the other back on the team, that's like, light years. They're totally different players. Like, that makes Raheem Mostert look like an absolute superstar. So yeah, I do think he's a great play moving forward, period. Like, he's in the RB2 conversation every week. He's going to give you RB1 weeks like he did last week. He scored 20.9 fantasy points last week. And if that route participation hangs in there, you can expect more 10, 12% target share games. Still, obviously, all going to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. He's never going to be somebody that gets a ton of targets because there's so many other, the other two elite weapons on the offense. But you mentioned the matchup. We're playing against Detroit. They give up the most rushing yards and touchdowns per game in non-overtime play, 163, and two rushing touchdowns per game. Like, that's a really high number. When you get to per game numbers, you're used to saying 0.63. When you see a 2, like, that sticks out to you, like, really in a big way. So yeah, Mostert is an absolute smash play. He could end up with a top 6 RB finish this weekend.
Bills Packers this weekend, and that was a game that I'm sure when the schedule makers put it out, it seemed like, hey, this is going to be great. You got Aaron Rodgers and the Packers, Josh Allen and the Bills. So far, the Bills have lived up to their end of the bargain. The Packers very much have not. And it's kind of a tale of 2 running backs, right? A.J. Dillon, well, I guess not really. I mean, A.J. Dillon is at a point where, like, you can't drop him, but you can't play him. Devin Singletary.
That's exactly. It's a terrible situation.
Yeah.
You can't drop him, but you can't play him. Those are the worst.
If something happens to Aaron Jones, then A.J. Dillon steps up. But right now, he's just completely unusable. Again, this week, Devin Singletary is, I feel like you can play him, but it's not great. I don't know what you're doing with either one of these guys. I guess we know what we're doing at AJ Dillon. What are we doing with Devin Singletary?
Yeah, AJ Dillon, you just got to sit him down. Somebody needs to have a talk with him. Give him a stern talking to, put him over on the bench, maybe motivate him a little bit. But yeah, they're 12-point dogs. AJ Dillon, this should be a 100% Aaron Jones game. So unless the Packers can come out and surprise us, which their game plan may be, finally, we're just going to try to run. Look, if there was ever a year, Marcus, where you could just be a conservative coach in the NFL, play all this shell coverage, just try to get the ball to bounce your way, don't turn the ball over, have a good sound running game. Some of these coaches that have tried to be more dynamic and open up their thinking, like I think Frank Reich, I think they have to be like, golly, like, this has been my game plan for 3 years. I got made fun of for it. And now you look over at the Giants, and that's what they're doing. They're just not turning the ball over. Like, you're like, well, the Giants doing really well. You're like, not very much. They just don't make mistakes. They don't beat themselves. And there's so many coaches in this league that, I call them narrow margin, coaches. Like, 1 year they'll win 10 games because, the oblong football bounces their way, which they have no control over. The next year it doesn't, and they win 5, right? And then the next year they win 9. The next year they win 4. They're fired. Like, it's over, right? So, but this might have been the year to do it, because some of these coaches that tried to open it up, and now there's this huge shift in the way passing defense is playing, and they can't score any points even though they're trying to throw the football. So it's kind of interesting the way that this has all worked out. But maybe the Packers just try to lean into the run game more. Like, that's their 2 best weapons still are AJ Dillon and Aaron Jones. But we did at least see Aaron Jones get involved in the passing game. Yeah. So we'll see. But I wouldn't touch AJ Dillon this weekend. Singletary is really interesting because on the surface, 78% snap share. Right, that's great. He plays in a great offense. Yeah, they're pass heavy and they're not going to run as much, but he gets involved in the passing game. He's had multiple games now where 15% target share, and in a team that'll drop back and throw the ball 65, 70% of the time, that can be really valuable in a PPR league. So he's still a borderline, RB2 for me this week. Normally, though, that profile will be like a high-end RB2, but we've kind of found out a little bit of a cheat code with Devin Singletary. Well, we think we have. We do have a small sample, but it's all we can do. We live in small samples. You and I have this conversation every week. But when they're leading, when they are playing games where they're leading by 3 on plays where they're leading by 3+ points or more, Devin Singletary, guess what? His snap share drops to 50%. So if you go back and you look at the games where the Bills have handily won, they're favored by 12 this weekend, Devin Singletary has not had good fantasy games. It has taken the other team pushing the Bills to keep Devin Singletary on the field and make him viable. So when the Bills are in a close game, when the Bills are trailing, Devin Singletary is a borderline RB1. When they're not, he's more of an RB3. So this, on paper, this looks like a game where Devin Singletary is more of an RB3. Like I said, I've got him as that low end RB2 because sometimes these lines don't work out. You don't know, like all of a sudden Packers show up, make this a competitive game. Devin Singletary has an RB1 week. That could still happen. But if we're trying to use this data to predict anything, like it says Devin Singletary is a guy you shy away from a little bit more than what you normally would this weekend.
That's I'm trying to wrap my head around that too. It doesn't seem to make sense logically, but yeah. That's wild. So, that's
We're
kind of
not trying to be logical here. We're not trying to be logical here.
No.
Not this week, Marcus.
Right, exactly. So let's look at some wide receivers. You mentioned Amon-Ra St. Brown, that he left the game with what was being called a concussion, but as you mentioned, it was the independent neurologist making a decision based on what they saw and saying it was probably best for him to sit out the rest of that game. But hopefully he's
It looked
back.
like I was watching that play. It looked like one to me. As soon as I saw the way, a lot of you're always watching for it now. It's funny, like used to concussions, like you just gave somebody some smelling salts, nobody even thought about it. Now players, like as soon as the hit happens, like you're immediately, it's like you just notice, like the body language, the signs now because your brain has just been made much more aware of it, right? So now you're watching for it. And I thought he had a concussion too. The way that he went to the ground, when he went to the ground, when he laid there for a second, then when he got up, like he almost tripped. It was very much like the Tua thing. Like I was totally surprised, to be honest, when I heard that it was not a concussion. I mean, there can be other things, right, that could cause you maybe to have those symptoms. But from the symptom perspective, I thought he had one as well. But it does sound like he's going to play. Not even, he's still technically in protocol. But I mean, Dan Campbell's already come out and said he didn't have one. He's playing. Like he'll be out there. So with Amon-Ra, the big thing this weekend, we've got the matchup with the Dolphins. It's got the biggest game total on the slate. And then the other part is Miami loves to run man coverage. They run the third most man coverage in the league at 43% of the time. And what's funny, Marcus, like with them, a lot of teams, when their good corners get hurt, they'll convert back to zone and they'll just kind of be like, okay, we're just not going to let anybody beat us, especially in the year where that's what everyone's doing. Not the Dolphins. The Dolphins don't care. Like they can have their four string, they lost their nickel corner who had been playing their second string corner and they just kept on playing man. Like they're like down bodies. Byron Jones still hasn't played. Now Xavier Howard played really good last weekend. He had been playing hurt and he's playing better now. But Amon-Ra gets to kick inside. And a lot of times, Xavier's not following someone into the slot. So he's going to be isolated. And man, he has been a man coverage destroyer this year. 38% of the time he gets man coverage, Jared Goff is going to him. So when you get a matchup like this, a lot of times like the zone and man coverage stuff, I never bring up because a lot of teams are just all in the middle, right? It's all kind of blah, or meh. Like it all just kind of blends together. I was blending meh and blah together. We got
like
blah.
that, actually.
So
Blah.
yeah. So we'll stick with it. But when you look at these teams that have super high rates either in zone or run, like I will bring them up on the show, and this is one of those cases. So anytime we're playing against the Dolphins and you have an alpha on the other side that eats against man, like it is a definite plus. And so with Amon-Ra, like I'm super excited. Like again, everything's just lining up for him. We just need him to stay healthy, but he's a low-end wide receiver one this weekend.
I do love that we have put to bed the argument of, is Amon-Ra St. Brown actually good or was it a fluke last year? And I think what we've seen this year suggests that no, last year was not a fluke. He's actually a good receiver. This dude can play. And so I'm glad we've we can end that argument at this point.
And typically someone that earns a 30% target share every game, even when it's everything the team has and a defense knows that, and they know that that's the one thing you've got to stop to win a game against that said team, that's usually a good indicator. Regardless of what someone is telling you they're seeing on film. Like that's what I found. Like, and don't get me wrong, I love watching the games too, and I love listening to film people. I'm not saying that film people were necessarily the ones against Amon-Ra. You had both sides. You had some people from an analytic background saying Amon-Ra was going to fail. You had some people that watched the games that say he was going to fail. So it was coming from all angles. But for me, like going back and historically looking at this stuff, when someone puts together the stretch of games that he had, almost every time they're a hit. And I just kind of rely. I do believe earning targets is the number one skill for a wide receiver. If you're really good, the quarterback will throw it to you because guess what? It's just like we've all played football in the backyard, right? If you're out there and it's your turn to be quarterback, sometimes it's a rotation in that situation. We've got a quarterback by committee. Like, let's be honest. Like you knew who your first read was
Of
usually. You
course.
knew who the guy was that was usually going to be open, even at that age. And you also knew the person that was, you're kind of like trying to coach them. You're trying to tell them, okay, here's what you do. Go out there and turn around. If all other four people are covered, I'm going to check it down to you. So Amon-Ra wasn't that guy. He was the opposite. He was the guy, Marcus, you were dropping back and first read every time. Let's go for Amon-Ra.
Yeah. It's funny.
Okay, cool. Yep,
Okay.
we're good.
We talked a little bit about the 49ers with Jimmy Garoppolo, a little bit of Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel. You mentioned a little bit of a hamstring issue that we have to pay attention to this week, but he has been really good against the Rams over his career. And I'll say this, I feel like even with all the potential changes in this offense, the one guy that I don't really seem to be worried about is Debo. I mean, look, you're talking about, who the guys are that are the first read when you're playing backyard football. Deebo Samuel to me sort of feels like one of those guys. So regardless of what role Christian McCaffrey has, I feel like Debo's still going to find the ball in his hands a lot. And he seems to be the one guy that I'm not worried about with this offense.
Yeah, and a lot of people kind of are. They're worried about Debo. Like I get it. Maybe some of the backfield touches evaporate because why give anything away
Sure.
if you just traded for McCaffrey? So like I could see that. But from a target perspective, on a team that has George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk, like he's still the alpha. Like this guy is demanding 27, 28% target shares consistently. Now, the last couple of weeks, you've seen the other two get more involved. What do we talk about? What do defenses do? They gravitate to what's changing. They gravitate to, wow, it's all Debo. Let's try and take him away. Oh, crap. There goes Brandon Ayuk. Oh, Jesus. They still have George Kittle. So these things happen, and we see them kind of ebb and flow through the course of the season. This is a great weekend, though, for Debo. We just talked about Amon-Ra St. Brown and what he does against man coverage. Debo is one of the few wide receivers. There's a handful. There's 5 or 6 that are, and I look at these trends over time. That's the other thing when I look at these data points for man and zone coverages. Like if I look back at the last 2 to 3 years and like they've just been like, oh, 1 year they were targeted more against zone, the next year more against man. I don't even mention it, like because I don't know that it's probably just noise. But with Debo, against zone coverage for the last 3 seasons, like that is where he eats. And typically the alpha receiver, like you see their role explode more against man, but he is one of these few guys that this happens for. And you've got a great matchup. He's playing against the Rams. That's the 4th most heavy zone team in the league. And maybe this is part of why the Rams have been a good defense, but Debo has been an absolute riddle for them. Over the last 5 games, he's averaging 101 yards receiving and 0.6 touchdowns per game. So it's a really good spot for him. The way that they like to scheme him the ball, it all really revolves around zone coverages. And so this is a huge potential weekend for Debo. Now, we got to keep an eye on him. Does have the hamstring injury. He did not practice yesterday. I remember seeing the play of the game last week where this happened. He continued playing. So I would expect that he probably will be limited today, limited Friday. Maybe we get a full practice on Friday, but my guess is something more like 2 limited practices. And Kyle Shanahan, in classic Kyle Shanahan style, will say he's a game time decision, like because that's just what him and Cliff Kingsbury do. They both call everything game time decisions. So we'll have to wait and see with Debo. Might be a little bit of worry about the injury, but if he's suiting up, like this is a great spot for him. He's a low end wide receiver 1, but he has that kind of upside. He could be the wide receiver 1 overall on the slate as long as he's healthy.
Look, as long as Debo's playing for the 49ers, he's playing for your fantasy team.
As long as Debo's playing anywhere.
That's true.
He could be released, and you hear that he's playing in a pickup game. You're like, just throw him back in the lineup.
I'll throw him in the lineup this week. We'll see what happens there. Brandon Cooks is a guy who has consistently just been a good receiver throughout his career. It was always amazing to me when he was going through that stretch where it seemed like he was getting traded every year or two because he just was productive. This year, there hasn't really been much to talk about with Brandon Cooks. I mean, you look at his weekly lines, and there's nothing that really jumps out at you, but you say you feel like this is a good spot for him this week.
Yeah, I think there are a few things for Brandon Cooks. Like if you go look at he's one of those where the utilization profile is really helpful. He's still the same receiver. He's the same receiver that he has been. It just hasn't necessarily happened. So he's still got a 23% target share. He's typically around 21, 22%. Last year I think he was at 23. So he's right around where he was last year. He's earning 7.5 targets per game. Like that's not elite. We would like them to throw the ball a little more, like the Texans. Even when they're losing, they don't care. They're one of these teams that, Lovie Smith, former defensive coordinator, you get this a lot. they're still trying to lean into the run. So they're going to run the ball even, more than the average NFL team would, even when they're trailing and they're in a close game. So that hurts Brandon Cooks a little bit. But overall, like the numbers are still there. And, he's had a couple of things over the last 2 weeks. Last week, he just didn't have a high target share, and that'll happen. A team could take you away. The week before that, they didn't run very many passing plays. So he had the target share, but there weren't very many routes. So there's been two kind of weird games over the last 2 weeks. But overall, like the body of work over the course of the season is still good. And then whenever you look at him playing against the Titans defense, like, it's not a huge game total or anything. Like these are two teams people don't expect a lot out of, but on a pure matchup basis, like the Titans defense immediately makes Brandon Cooks someone that I push to the high end of my wide receiver 3 range. You could make an argument for him in the low end wide receiver 2 range. Because the Titans allow the second most fantasy points to opposing pass catchers in non-overtime play this year. It's just a super juicy matchup. They've had several receivers just go off against them, and so I really do like Cooks this weekend. At a minimum, he's a high-end wide receiver 3, so I would not be afraid to have him in my lineup.
One tight end I wanted to get to, Robert Tonyan, and I know we talked about the Packers and their offense being just not great so far this year, but in a world where we are thirsty for any sort of tight end production, can we start to maybe lean on Big Bob a little bit down the stretch?
Big Bobby Tonyan. I think we might be able to. Like, he hasn't got to the 80% route participation that is historically kind of the number you want to get to have a shot at being a tight end one, especially a tight end one that you're semi-excited, right, about starting. Because even tight ends is funny the way we talk about it. Really, like, we should make the tight end 1 conversation just really be, well, here are the top 4 guys. And then after that, it's really more of we're starting the tight end 2 conversation, just because it's the onesie position, you only need 12 because really there's a handful that you're really excited to start. And then the rest is kind of like, I don't know, like it's the consternation, gnashing of teeth, all these different things. You choose your term, Marcus, but with Tonyan, what's nice is the utilization has been picking up. So he hadn't gotten to that 80%, but over the last 2 weeks, 74% and 73% route participation. And he's a guy that we knew started the season. He hardly practiced, in the preseason. So he was coming off of a major knee injury. And so we're seeing the trend we want to, which is a gradual increase in his workload. So he's probably settling in around this. The Packers still like to use multiple tight ends and do a lot of rotating and things like that. But if you look at his targets per route run, 22%. That's higher than Allen Lazard. That's higher than Romeo Doubs. So when he's on the field, he's actually being targeted more than the other 2 players. So that's a positive thing. So we've got the injury. He's getting better. We've seen, more participation. He's getting targeted when he's on the field. Now, we don't have a really easy matchup this weekend against Buffalo. So Buffalo is a top 8, coverage unit according to PFF grades at a 71.5, but they run the 6th most zone in the NFL, 74%, and they have some games where they just go like complete zone. Like they've at one point, like I want to say they were in the 90% range for zone coverage this year. And then, they switch things up and they ran a little bit more man here and there. They've also been getting healthier in their secondary, so that can help, make them a little bit more flexible, right, in the coverages they're going to run, but still very zone heavy team. And whenever you look at tight ends, you look at running backs, like this is just a macro cheat code. You play against super heavy zone teams, typically the ball gets spread out more, unless you've got a Deebo Samuel. You just throw the Deebo every time. Typically the ball gets spread out more, and what that usually means is more targets to tight ends, more targets to running backs. So that's just something the audience can use. If you happen to know which teams are running the most zone, you know who the team is that they're playing, obviously. Well, immediately you should think about the tight end, you should think about the running back. But we've seen this specifically play out for Robert Tonyan against man coverage this year. Marcus, targets per route run, 9%. Guess what it is at zone?
Let's go with 20, I'm going to guess.
30%. He has a 30% targets per route run against zone coverage. So even though this doesn't on the surface look like a good matchup for, any really Packers pass catcher, because the Bills are pretty tough, it's a sneaky spot, for Robert Tonyan this week. He's still on the waiver wire in a lot of leagues. I have him as a low end tight end 1 this weekend. If he does happen to ever get to that 80-85% route participation, we could be talking about him more as like that mid-range tight end 1, borderline getting kind of excited about him. But this week, still a sneaky tight end 1.
Yeah, look, and Aaron Rodgers talking about the guys who are making the fewest mistakes should be playing. Maybe that was a veiled message that Robert Tonyan needs to be on the field a little bit more.
Kind of like the veiled message with Chicago. Hey, we're gonna go more to the hot hand at running back. And what they meant, no, we're just going to give Justin Fields as the hot hand.
We're going to let Justin Fields run the ball a little bit more. Right, exactly. Of course, you can check out all the rankings, as I mentioned earlier, at fantasylife.com. Be sure to go over there, go check it out. Go check out all the different tools that we have as well to help you set your lineups. And as I always suggest you do, go sign up for the newsletter if you haven't already. It's always cool every morning to get an email that says Matthew Berry in your inbox. Go do it. Absolutely. As we wrap up the show, you, Dwayne, pointed out that the Scott Barrett, who does a lot of great work over at Fantasy Points, put together a couple of tweets that had the best fantasy draft picks and the worst fantasy draft picks by round, going through the first 8 or 10 rounds of your drafts. And looking at the best, right? Round 1, Austin Eckler. Round 2, Josh Allen. Round 3, Tyreek Hill. Round 4, Marquise Brown. Round 5, Breece Hall. Poor little out for him right now. Round 6, Dameon Pierce. Round 7, Josh Jacobs. Round 8, Ramondre Stevenson. As I'm looking at this one, I think you can make a case, for look, Eckler, yeah, obviously. Josh Allen, sure, we kind of saw that coming. I think Tyreek Hill, even to a point, we sort of understood that. The one that jumps out to me, though, in round 7 was Josh Jacobs, because a lot of people, myself included, completely faded Josh Jacobs, wanted no parts of him this year, because we just didn't think he was going to get the sort of opportunity he was going to get. And especially, look, remember the Hall of Fame game where he played? It seemed like he played like 50 snaps. I'm like, what is he doing?
I think you and I drafted, I think, against each other that weekend out in Canton. I'd like to look back at that draft and how far did Josh Jacobs fall?
Yeah.
And an industry expert draft like Josh J, he probably and that was a 14-team league. I bet he was still on the board in like round 7 or 8.
Nobody wanted to touch him. And now here we are. We're sitting here like, man, that was maybe the biggest swing and miss in all of fantasy this year. And I don't really see any reason why it can't continue based on the way the Raiders are using him right now.
Yeah, and we've talked about Jacobs, but the big thing is just Josh McDaniels went away from his, committee approach. And it's, again, so I try to think about these things, and sometimes there's nothing to take away, right? You just have one-off scenarios you could never, fully account for. But when I look at Josh Jacobs, he reminds me of James Conner last year. He reminds me of Leonard Fournette last year. Backs that are in an ambiguous situation, but former early round draft picks. We know they're talented. Maybe they haven't been the most efficient, like maybe in the previous season. And that's what a lot of people pointed to is that Josh Jacobs, oh my God, last year he was washed. But that wasn't the thing for me. Honestly, I was just hung up on the fact that I thought McDaniels wasn't going to get away, right, from this committee. And I think looking back, seeing that it was Amir Abdullah, seeing that it was Brandon Bolden, and yeah, they drafted a running back, but not until the 4th round, and Zamir White. I think we should have, once his price tag got to that round, right? Once he became a round 7, round 8 pick, we shouldn't be afraid, right, to take those backs that fit that profile. Because the last 2 years, if you've done that, Leonard Fournette won people leagues last year. James Conner was winning leagues until he got the ankle sprain in the right as we were going into the fantasy playoffs. I remember that play. And then Josh Jacobs, he's getting all the 2-minute offense. He's getting the passing down work. That's been the big difference for him. John Gruden would never give him that. The other thing is we had a coaching change there. So I think those are some of the things that I want to dig into deeper, in the offseason. A couple real quick macro takes on this list for me too. Josh Allen, yeah, we expected him to be good, but I still was not spending a round 2 pick on Josh Allen. My thought was that still too high of an opportunity cost. And I still think it was if you drafted Jalen Hurts, right, in round 6. If you drafted Kyler Murray, it doesn't feel as good right now. Now we're hoping Kyler Murray can turn it around. He still has a lot of the right things going for him. So opportunity costs were high, but Josh Allen is so good that, maybe we have to recalibrate, right, the way we're thinking about these quarterbacks. I know right now over on, on some of the platforms like Underdog that are doing where you can draft right now and start a season, the quarterbacks are going super high. So the adjustment, it's already happening. But this year we've got a unique situation with quarterbacks. And then Tyreek Hill is the other one for me, just because he should have been a 1st round pick. He should have been a late 1st round pick, and we let situation again dictate too much for someone with so much talent, especially knowing that we had a coordinator we liked in Mike McDaniel. So look at that, Josh McDaniels and Mike McDaniel in the same segment, and we got the S's in the right spots.
Right.
We watch the film, we get better, as Ian Hardis would say. So really interesting. And then the last real quick thing is, man, look at the rookie running backs. Breece Hall, yeah, he's out. But then Damian Pierce, and guess who's going to be on this list in the next week or two? It's going to be Kenneth Walker. Yeah. So it's a good year to be a zero or hero RB drafter because some of these running backs that are hitting late, you could have waited on. But here's the problem. Most people that were drafting zero or hero, they were fading Josh Jacobs. And so, that pick was J.K. Dobbins for most people. Most people that were going with that route, like J.K., so, I mean, look, these fine little things, like we get so honed in on a take. Imagine some people probably drafted 20 zero RB teams and they didn't draft Josh Jacobs one time. And now they're looking at it going, oh my God, had I drafted Josh Jacobs as my target, as my RB2 or RB1 and that kind of build, like you would be winning your entire league. But if you drafted J.K. Dobbins, you're probably in like 5th place, even though your receivers are awesome.
Right. Well, speaking of which, let's get to the list of the worst picks because J.K. Dobbins is there in round 6. Round 1, Jonathan Taylor. Round 2, Javonte Williams. Round 3, Keenan Allen. Round 4, Allen Robinson. Round 5, Cam Akers. Dobbins at 6. Elijah Mitchell in round 7. Trey Lance in round 8. Round 9, Kadarius Toney. Round 10, and Sky Moore. There are a handful of these guys we can just sort of discount because injury has been the issue. I mean, you look at Williams, you look at Keenan Allen, Elijah Mitchell, Trey Lance, Kadarius Toney. Injury has contributed to them not performing fantasy-wise, but there's some other ones. Jonathan Taylor, and you and I have talked about Frank Reich maybe deciding he's going to go a little bit more run-heavy because the Matt Ryan experiment did not work at all. But you want to talk about being frustrated. If you drafted him number 1 overall, you haven't gotten anything close to your return on investment so far.
Yeah, and the other easy pick there would have been Cooper Kupp, right? So, I mean, even if you had gone CMC, you'd be in a little bit better position. But I think with Jonathan Taylor, he's the one that bothers me the least on this list of people. I get it. You spent the first overall pick, but he's still such a talented player. It's just going to be hard. Like he's part of his has been injury as well. He's got the ankle sprain, so he's missed the last 2 games. He was a fragile number 1 overall pick. Like we talked about this in the offseason, just because he hasn't always been involved in the passing game. We knew he could be game script dependent. Last year, the Colts, had the 4th least trailing plays in the league. That's something that can be very fragile from year to year, especially in a narrow margin coaching situation, like the kind of offense we had seen Frank Reich like to run. Those things can flip flop very quickly. So Taylor really has had like a perfect storm of everything going wrong. I would just look at him though as being like, this is the start of the season. We're starting the season this weekend. He's going to be healthy. Last week he got involved a little bit more in the passing game, even though we still saw Nyheim Hines out there. And I do think there's going to be an identity switch. Like he doesn't bother me as much. It's hard to look at him and be like, oh, I'm just not going to take Jonathan Taylor in the top 3 picks. Like I can't find a way to work through everything that's happened and be like, he still shouldn't have been a top 3 pick. Like I would still today I would rather have him on my team than, I mean, how many running backs would you rather have on your team than Jonathan Taylor right now for the rest of the season?
Yeah,
I mean, it's still, you can name a few that you might, maybe you would rather have Saquon Barkley. Maybe you would still rather have CMC. I think those are both fine if you would, but I think you can make an argument that for the rest of the season, you're going to feel just as good about Jonathan Taylor. Their roles are definitely more robust. So,
yeah. So, I mean, if we're doing that, what is it Cam Akers? Is he the one that sort of sticks out as the big, because he hasn't been
I think Allen Robinson and Cam Akers, the 2 Rams. Allen Robinson was a guy that, we were a little twisted on because we didn't know for sure. We didn't know, was it due to playing in a really bad offense and he was hurt last year that we saw his production dip, because we saw the same thing in a similar situation for DeAndre Hopkins, and that wasn't a problem. DeAndre Hopkins comes back and has a 50% target share in his first game. Allen Robinson, on the other hand, it did look like his, underlying talent metrics might be hitting a cliff, and it looks like that was just actually true. And I think it also, the thing we just need to remember with the Rams, until further notice, like it's just Cooper Kupp, man. Like he gets so much. There's not a lot left, for everyone else, especially if you're going to divvy it up. Like theoretically, there should still be enough room for Allen Robinson to have a 25% target share, but he hasn't been able to out-earn Tyler Higbee, a guy that's really just been had one blip on the radar, 3 or 4 years ago at the end of a season because everyone on the Rams was hurt.
He's struggling to out-earn Ben Skoranek, depending on the week.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so with Robinson, I do think he's just cooked. And look, they're not doing him any favors in the offense. They're not scheming things up. Cam Akers, look, I mean, you were betting on a better offense, and then, just everything's gone wrong for Cam Akers. You were betting on the Rams being a better offense. You were betting on him scoring some touchdowns. Everybody thought that Darrell Henderson would probably be the passing down back, so that was not a surprise whenever that played out to be the case. But now this whole thing, where he's, who knows what's going on between him and the team, but he's not playing. He's not going to play. Like, he's going to get traded. But he was a dead zone running back. He was the definition of a dead zone running back, a guy that had been not very efficient. He was a replaceable piece, by comparison to his peers, looking at the data, and you were having to take him instead of you had to take him instead of taking receivers you should take, like Allen Robinson, Marcus. So you can't do that.
That's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation right there.
Yeah.
So,
and then Kadarius was just an upside thing, but I mean, he was running with the first team all preseason, then he gets hurt, does the normal Kadarius thing, and now he's in the doghouse. Like, some things like that you can't control. You're just betting on a talent profile. Round 9, that bothers me less. Obviously, that one really stings because you've gotten zero, nothing. The only thing Kadarius Toney is doing is, if you're playing in a really deep league like some of the ones I play in, he's just burning a roster spot, because now I'm to the point where on principle, I'm like, I'm just holding him. I'm just going to hold him, because as soon as he's the kind of guy that will drive you nuts. As soon as you drop him, the next week, they're going to be like, he's playing, and you're going to be like, if he's on the field in that offense, as long as he's out there, he's going to do well if he ever gets his chance. Just, we don't know that he'll ever get it, but I do not want to let someone else have the satisfaction of getting to use him. I drafted him, damn it. I drafted him. He can just stick on my roster. I'll let him ride the bench. I'm not letting someone else have him. And they freaking beat me in the championship game with Kadarius Toney in their damn lineup.
We're just gonna go down with the ship with Kadarius Toney.
Exactly.
We're all gonna do it.
9th round pick. He shouldn't be killing you anyway. But yeah, it has not worked out.
Yeah. Oh wow. So, of course, we'll go through, and I'm sure next year we'll draft guys again, and I'm sure this point next year we'll probably have this same conversation again about the guys who are overperforming and underperforming. We know certainly.
So who's your worst one, non-injury? Who's the one for you that you're just like this was the worst?
I guess it's Cam Akers for me. And mostly because I didn't draft him in a lot of spots, but I drafted him in a couple, and I knew better. Like, I knew better. I knew that he was going to underperform, or at least that the odds of it happening were really, really great. And it was one of those things where I held my nose, I made the pick. And so I guess for me, that makes it worse, right? When you know better, when you know the stove is hot and you touch it anyway. That's sort of how I feel about Cam Akers. It's like, I knew that this was very much in the range of outcomes, and I went on and did it. And so I have no one to blame but myself in that situation.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, because he was the one that was, to your point, he was the hot stove. He was the one. And so I don't have very much Cam Akers. I only took him when he fell past ADP. But I took him in some really big drafts where, he fell. And I was like, okay, I'm going to take Cam Akers. Like, and sometimes, there's the thing, we don't catch falling knives, but then there's other times where it's like, man, you got, some, if they're a value past ADP, like ADP, if you were just being a value drafter on ADP, would have saved you on Josh Jacobs. Yep. It would have totally burnt, like, everything we talk about. There's this dichotomy, right? There is that, well, in this case, it worked really well. In this case, it was terrible. Right. Josh Jacobs, if you had just been an ADP enforcer and was like, okay, fine, you guys are going to let Josh Jacobs fall, I'll take him. There were plenty of drafts where you could have done that, and you would be looking up winning your league right now. But if you tried that same thing with Cam Akers, who was falling as we moved into September, you're losing. So it's interesting, right? We have these arguments and everything has to be black or white, and you see it all the time on social media, but really, like, there's just a lot of gray with this stuff. There's a lot of gray. We want it to be black and white. We want it to be logical. We want to have sound reasoning behind everything we do. We want to have conviction. But when you look back at these things, like, they can go either way on you.
Yep, absolutely. What I do know is black and white is that you can get some good information over at fantasylife.com. You talk about the rankings, you talk about the newsletter, all the stuff that's going on over there. And hey, man, be a part of our community too. Join the Discord, join some of the chats, get involved in the conversation as well. It's all really good stuff. It's been a lot of good stuff on this show as well. We certainly appreciate you guys checking in and hanging out with us. Should be a really fun week 8, which gets underway. That'll do it for this edition of the Fantasy Life Podcast. For Dwayne, I am Marcus. Enjoy week 8, everybody, and we'll talk to you next week.